Scott, man, great to see you again. So glad to have you on this day leading into Veterans Day. You and I spoke a little bit earlier this week. We have been speaking a lot over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And we spoke a little bit earlier this week. And you said, listen, I'd love to talk about Veterans Day. And, you know, what you see, and not just what you see and think about, but what you've done as far as an ongoing role for veterans, you know, after the military. And I think it's really important to talk about that here on Veterans Day.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for having me on, pal. And you know, you and I have talked a lot lately, and I think you've had the opportunity to see some of the amazing things our veterans and military families can do. You know, for me, being out of the Army for almost 11 years now, after the longest war in our history, I find myself more and more convinced as our country becomes more disconnected, more divided, more polarized, that our veteran community, and I include military families in this, represent the true moral compass and probably last shot we have at coming together as a nation. And I know that's a pretty stark statement, but I believe it.
Tell me why. Why is it our last shot as a country?
Well, the levels, you know, I spent most of my life as a Green Beret, working in trust-depleted societies, you know, that are tearing each other apart along tribal lines, factioning, that kind of thing. And it doesn't end well, you know. And when you look at what I call shadow tribalism that's happening in this country today, the levels of division that are happening are, to me, very, very similar to the levels of division, organizational collapse, and just civil society chaos that I've seen in so many other countries. And we're not immune to it. You know, we're not immune to it. A stability as a first world nation of abundance is not an entitlement. It is maintained through the stewardship of leadership. And what I see is that our institutional leaders who we once relied upon to maintain that stability and that liberal democracy, civil society that values the individual over the group, that allows abundance to happen. It's those leaders are failing us, and they're failing us in large numbers. And what I've seen since getting out of the military is it's veterans and a handful of civilian volunteers that are trying to fill those gaps.
So I want to talk about that in just a moment, but you make me think about so much that I've been reading about lately, Scott. So I want to share with you some of the thoughts that I've sort of been focused on. My attention has been centered on these thoughts for the last couple of weeks and months, and that is, tribalism is the nature of man. It is our fundamental survival tool to create tribes of commonality in order to share responsibility and increase the opportunity for survival. And so that's sort of the base, core, foundation of man. You know, I was reading a lot about, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, about Arab culture. And you were in Afghanistan, and I think you were in Iraq as well. So, you know, that's interaction with Arab culture. And so many of those countries did not have, as you pointed out, a developed civil society. So they were resting on that foundation. They were resting on tribalism. And when you get that, you get a lot of something called honor culture. When you can't turn to some outside source that you trust to resolve your issues, everything comes down to honor. And that's where you get, and honor is virtuous, but honor as a code can also take you in directions of like vengeance and revenge and these types of things that to defend one's honor. And the idea, Scott, of a nation state, of moving beyond the tribe, requires a man to say, I will buy into a set of values that I see as more advantageous to me, my family, and my tribe than my natural gravitational pull of race or religion or geography that is my foundational survival tool, that is my tribe. So what I've been talking about here, Scott, is what we've lost as a country in America is the buy-in that's necessary for a nation state. That's the buy-in of our common values.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm just going to build on what you said. There's a guy named Robert Putnam. He's a social scientist. He's written a couple of books. One of them is Bowling Alone. The other one is The Upswing. And the rub of his books, and that I've built a lot of my leadership stuff around, is what Putnam says is that, you know, all of us come from these honor-based societies, or another term of it is status societies. We all originate from that. In fact, mammals are status societies. I mean, and it's built really around resource scarcity. Not having enough, you have to group together to obtain and acquire enough resources to live. And so one's status within that group is essential to have enough to survive. And the collective, the group, the in-group is the end-all be-all to how you navigate your civil society. We teach this in the Green Beret qualification course because you have to understand fundamentally that this is the origin of trust. And what Putnam called it was bonding trust, Will. This trust that you have in your kin, your cousins, your neighbor, your in-group. And it's a deep trust, but it's not wide. And so when you have this bonding trust environment, it's helpful when you're trying to acquire enough resources to survive. But when you start getting into the realm of wanting to thrive, to get beyond just scarcity, then you need a different kind of trust. And what Putnam calls this is bridging social capital, or what I call it bridging trust. The ability to bridge beyond one's in-group, where the emphasis is no longer on the group or the clan, it's on the individual. And the ability to bridge beyond your in-group and start a business working with people from a different ethnicity or religion. It's really so fundamental to what this country is founded on. But the only way it holds, Will, it's not a natural state for humanity. Bridging trust is not natural. It has to be preserved and stewarded by leaders in the Constitution, rule of law. And when when institutional leaders abandon that, you don't lose trust altogether. What happens is you go back to where you came from. You go back to bonding trust. You go back to in groups that you feel safer with because everything's falling apart. And if you look around the country right now, that's what's happening. Everyone is reverting back to their in groups because they've lost faith in the institutions, the social capital with their neighbors, and in the common stories that we tell the world.
You and I have talked about the role of Green Berets and sort of this philosopher warrior. And I know that you were so integral in the village stability efforts in Afghanistan. Knowing that, do you feel like looking back on that, Scott, that was, and I don't mean any offense, I only mean this as an exercise in thoughtfulness, but do you feel like that was an effort? All of the efforts in Afghanistan were ultimately efforts doomed to fail because Afghanistan is so stuck back, literally maybe more than centuries. It could be stuck back thousands of years in that honor-bound society where you were never going to get them to trust some outside institution like a national government.
It's a great question, and I really don't, and I'll tell you why. And I talked about this in Game Changers before the country ever fell. I was saying that we were trying to put a square peg in a round hole. What we didn't do after 2001, Will, was we didn't recognize the nature of the civil society that we were trying to stabilize. And if you want to go a step further, what was it that we were really trying to do in Afghanistan? Well, we had been hit with the worst terror attack in our nation's history, and it emanated from a strategic safe haven where a violent extremist group with global power projection capability established their safe haven, set up shop in an undergoverned, at-risk area that was honor-based and that was distanced from a top-down central government, right? And so they went in and they set up shop there, and they filled all of the gaps and needs of the local people, from dispute resolution to food security. And by doing that, they established a level of autonomy that they could operate, plan, project, and launch attacks against the West. That is the MO for global violent extremist groups. They are going to set up shop in hard-to-reach, at-risk, undergoverned areas. So we don't retain the isolationist option to just leave them be because this country's tribal. What I believe is that approach should have been done in 2002 when 5th Special Forces Group and the Horse Soldiers dislodged Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in less than 90 days. And you had a whole range of locals in Afghanistan wanting to reclaim their local autonomy that they hadn't had in 40 years. But we were so adamant about projecting the Western way of war and putting 100,000 troops in the country versus that helping communities stand up from the bottom up. And so I think I've doubled down on this. And I believe that if we're going to create true antibodies to global terrorism in at-risk, hard-to-reach areas, we are going to have to get better at connecting at a local level, community engagement, and quit abandoning our damn allies.
Okay, I want to definitely follow up on that. I also want to say a couple of things here because I think, somebody listening might be forgiven for a little bit of confusion when you and I bring up honor so many times, because honor is such a virtue. I mean, it is what holds the individual to a code of conduct that is virtuous, the idea of honor. But what we're talking about here is when honor isn't just your code of conduct, but honor is your societal organizing mechanism, because there's nothing else, right?
Right.
And so what that leads to, like anything, I mean, everything, there are two sides to every coin. You have too much of any one thing, you'll see the downside of that very thing. And so when we're talking about a society organized around honor, this is where you get, honor killings in Islam, right?
Yeah.
If someone insults you, you have to then kill. If somebody hurts you, you got to hurt their family, and on and on. And so that's what we mean by that's a fair characterization about this, right, Scott? When I talk about honor,
and I want to just clarify a little bit more. So when you think about honor-based societies, what we're actually talking about is a society that puts its emphasis on the group above the individual, right? So the group is the end-all be-all, and so when you talk about honor and shame, that is the currency of behavior in these groups. So it is not honor unto oneself, right? So if for example, if something is happening around you and you know it to be wrong internally, right, and you take a stand against that, that is in a collective honor-based society, that is not honorable, because your honor is an obligation to the group. It is how you preserve honor of the group. And so it has very little to do, in many cases, with right and wrong, moral, immoral. It has to do with the preservation of status. Mm-hmm. Status could almost be interchangeable, really. Is the status of the individual within the group and the status of the group within other groups. And honor is the currency by which you achieve that. But honor is your obligations to your collective. It's not to yourself. And that's where it can get really ugly, because each group is trying to preserve its own honor. And so anything goes when you're trying to do that.
All right, and then the other thing I wanted to discuss is that you and I've gotten to know each other over time in that I became aware and have helped talk about Operation Pineapple Express, your veteran-led from the bottom-up efforts to get people out of Afghanistan. We worked together on Task Force Lahaina to marshal aid to the people of Maui. We have been in contact regarding stuff when it comes to veteran-led efforts, bottom-up, when it comes to Israel. So one thing I know that you keep coming back to, and you've come back to it in our conversation, is your philosophical belief in bottom up, that you see failure from the top, which may or may not be inevitable, Scott. And I don't think you think it's inevitable because you've talked about the role of leadership here today. But I do know that you believe deeply in this idea of not just aid and effort, but building societies from the bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of battle cry to people today, and not just veterans, is nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. And when we see what's going on in our own civil society, whether it's at the community level, regional, national, international, we've been conditioned to think that, okay, if there's a problem, just sit tight and somebody's going to come handle it, right? And we've been conditioned to expect that from local, state, federal government, and other institutional leaders. And my premise is that for whatever reason, and I think there's a range of reasons today, I don't think that's a safe assumption. I don't think that just because something is broken in your life, that someone's going to come along with institutional authority and fix it. And that's okay. I mean, there's a large part of me that says that's okay, because what I believe is actually at play here is what Putnam talks about with the upswing, in that in the early 1900s, we were in a very similar place in the United States. There was a lot of division. There was a lot of haves and have-nots. Agricultural was giving way to industry. Borders were out of control. And you saw a lot of bottom-up movement, Will. That's when Alcoholics Anonymous got started, the Rotary Club, the Junior League, NAACP, Future Farmers of America. Pretty much every social organization that you and I knew as kids that our parents participated in, it started between like 1900 and 1910, and it ran all the way to 1972, this upswing of bottom-up social capital. And, there's a lot of folks looking at this saying, I think we're due. I think we're due for another upswing. And I personally believe that what happened with Pineapple and these other volunteer groups in the aftermath of the Afghanistan withdrawal might just be the first shots across the bow on that. And because I'm seeing a lot of this, and you and I've both seen it. We've seen very responsible citizens stepping into the breach, doing amazing things that were heretofore reserved for institutional leaders. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need institutional leaders. Obviously, we do. But I do believe that bottom-up leaders can model what it's supposed to look like and vote the mouth breathers out.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin on that, and I'm going to come back, and I'll keep track of every pin I put into this conversation. But now I want to pick up on something you said a minute ago, and I heard the passion in your voice, okay, when you said don't abandon our damn allies, and you talk about this world of being not isolated but engaged at the bottom level up. So let me so you and I have become good enough friends that I think that I can tell you everything I think without it being insult, because you'll have a thoughtful response where I may or may not be right or wrong. I have noticed that guys who have served and served at especially high levels, whether or not that be Green Berets and who are now serving in Congress or Navy SEALs, there's a greater willingness to be involved in affairs that the average American doesn't understand or see the interest of America. So, for example, Ukraine, Scott, or I think it's a very legitimate question even when it comes to the ongoing and never-ending fight in the Middle East for Israel, that it's a very legitimate question for the American public to ask, but what is the America first interest? And here's why, Scott. It's because I believe in bottom up. Like, we have problems at home, and I want to solve stuff on our street corners and at our border, and I don't know why it feels like those problems go neglected while we put so much emphasis and effort into sending guys like you over to Afghanistan, or if it ends up being Israel, or if it's Ukraine. I have a skepticism towards it, Scott, that I feel like a lot of guys who've been on the ground like yourself have a bigger passion.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, and I don't disagree with the need to take care of things at home and deal with local issues. I guess maybe the way I choose to think of that is, first of all, guys like me who are Green Berets and who are Green Berets, we comprise 6,500 out of 1.4 million in the military. So you're talking about a very specialized group of folks who are supposed to go do that.
Yes.
Like, that's what they're supposed to do. And right now, as we speak, Green Berets are operating in something like 65 countries around the world as a force multiplier to work by, with, and through indigenous people to help them stand up on their own and do their own work. So that's usually what I go back to when I get the America First response is I agree. However, we do have within our inventory and it's not just Green Berets either. We have this with expeditionary diplomats, with aid workers. We have this capability. The larger problem, I think, is a lot of civilian policymakers and politicians and even senior military leaders don't understand that capability. We want to solve everything with a SEAL platoon or a Marine battalion, and that's not a slight on those guys, but there's a lot of these problems that can be addressed abroad that are long-term issues that are going to require persistent sustainment over 20 years. I always said Afghanistan was a 75-year engagement. And I stand by that, but we've been in Colombia for 40 years with up to 200 Green Berets, 365, 24/7. No one even knows. So, that's one side of it. And then on the local side, as far as like what we should be doing at home, I think that's almost a different conversation in that I look at our citizenry and I look at the way that we are behaving towards each other, and the way that we have our heads down in these devices like we're asleep at the switch. And I think there's a whole host of issues in terms of just self-actualization and awareness and willingness to lead at a local level. I saw a study not too long ago where they called 70% of the American people the exhausted majority, that are just worn the heck out, and they just, what's the point? That concerns me actually more than, should we be in Ukraine, not Ukraine? I mean, I just feel like there's an inaction at home that really worries me.
And that's the bottom up that gets me passionate, Scott. Like, of all the efforts, obviously, that we were involved with together, Lahaina was the one that I was most involved with. But I want to see that bottom up here in America. Like, when you talk about, is there a new swing? And you talk about the role of leadership. And I think this comes back to vets. You guys are doing amazing things with the vets. I would love to see that applied like it was applied in Lahaina. But not just Lahaina. Like, every state right now has a problem that is ignored by American leaders, right? And big problems. And you talked about AA and Future Farmers of America. I would even go more ground level. Like, what are you doing with your neighbor? How's your neighbor?
Yeah.
How's your church? How's your community? But then from there, grow something. And that's what I think of when I think of bottom up right here at home in America.
There's a guy, you know him, Ben Owen. I introduced you to Ben. So Ben is an Army veteran, and to exactly to your point, Ben and his wife Jess, hardcore drug addicts in their younger years. They almost died on the streets of South Memphis. Their story is insane. The level of addiction and just deprivation that they went through. They got clean. And then Ben was very involved with the Afghanistan withdrawal. But what he has since done is he is putting his efforts towards a nonprofit called We Fight Monsters. And he's basically mobilizing veterans and volunteers to go into the very trap houses where he and Jess used. They are raising money, buying back the trap houses, employing alcoholics and addicts who have carpentry skills, electrical skills, and they are turning those trap houses into halfway houses. And it's so far it's been very successful. Crime has really dropped there. But to your point, I mean, that's about as local as you can get, man. And this is a dude who's has every reason to kind of say, what's the point? But he's in there taking what he learned in the military, but he's applying it at a grassroots local level, and people are getting excited about it. People are starting. There's veterans I've been there, Monty and I've been there like 3 times. Veterans are coming from all over the country to be part of this, and he's got them connected on LinkedIn. And I think it's just one of many opportunities like that, to your point, of a very, very, very grassroots local approach. I'm a country boy, and I believe that that's exactly how it goes.
So talk to me about then, here we are, Veterans Day, and the role you want to see for veterans in like, how does this work? Like, we can talk esoterically, and not that that's worthless. That's my nature often. But at the end, like, what can we do? How can we serve both veterans and America from the bottom up?
Well, I would say first let me just address 2 different levels here as we celebrate Veterans Day. One is to civilians like yourself. When it comes, I believe our veteran population represents a tremendous national asset base because of the ways that they've had to lead and the environments of ambiguity, volatility, uncertainty that they've had to navigate. So they've got this innate skill set that they bring home, but the world is so different. Like you talked about that they live in an honor-based society. The military is an honor-based society. And all of a sudden you come home to a very, very individualized society, and it's hard to know where you fit. And to what I would say to civilians is we need deep connections with our neighbors. We need to have our stories heard without judgment. And then we need to be able to kind of walk that path into reintegration with civilians at our side. I mean, I look at like what you and I did with Task Force Lahaina. You had a very, very explicit skill set and asset base that you brought. I did as well. We connected around that, and we got to know what each other was capable of, and, you know, did some cool things. And I think that is something that civilians all over the country can do, is know this. We're way past thank you for your service. We need civilians to help us transition. You guys know the ropes. You understand the arena. And with just a little bit of like local eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly kind of connection, we can pull off some amazing things. Now, flipping that to the veteran side, I believe that what we have to do as veterans is we have to look in these places where we see things that are broken or laying on the floor and starting to stink. And we just have to say, okay, nobody's coming. I'll lead. What can I do here? And get in there and start building a community of practice or influence around the problem. Get people talking about it. Diverse groups, bring them together, frame the problem, talk about solutions, use technology and platforms to build these communities of interest that move fast and agile, and they typically will bring others to bear. So that's kind of my formula for the veteran approach, is to look for what's broken, know that nobody's coming, jump in there and bring those leadership connection skills and organization skills that you knew in the military to bear around wicked problems.
That's what I was going to ask you, Scott, because I was going to ask you what unique skills of a veteran enables them to take on that role. Because look, and this is a crude characterization, not one that applies very well to Green Berets, but you know, the military at its essence is a destruction machine, more than a creation machine, right? It is destroy your enemy.
Yeah.
Now, you develop skills in that pursuit, as you said, organization and leadership. So is that the skills that transfer back to the streets of Memphis, you know, in helping? I see you making a face. What is it?
Well, to some degree it is, but I think that, you know, when you think about what is it we asked our military to do for the last 20 years? I mean, we put them in these situations where even a low-ranking sergeant had to solve civil society disagreements that would make a diplomat spit up a hairball, you know, and they had to solve these things, like, and they were really wicked, ill-structured problems. I'll just give you, if I could, I'll just give you one from my own life, you know, is I spent most of my time doing village stability and tribal engagement. But it became obvious to me about 6 years ago that our civilians did not understand at all the impact of modern war. They thought of it more as a Fortnite game. And most of our veteran population was really starting to question whether any of this was even worth it. And we needed a way to bring communities together and to have conversations about war. I wrote a play about the war. Never wrote anything like that in my life. And then to complete my midlife crisis, I studied theater at age 50 in New York City under Carl Bury and Larry Moss. And I studied for a year. And then I brought other veteran actors, half of them not actors, brought them together. We did this play, 16 cities in a year. We put a low-budget film up during COVID. Gary Sinise saw it during Pineapple Express, contacted me and put us on tour for another year. We just wrapped up a tour with him with an all-veteran military family member cast, and we performed for thousands and thousands of people around the country. We did over 250 PTS interventions in the lobbies with our volunteer therapists that traveled with us, 75 Gold Star families, and it's still going. None of us had even our touring company had never done a play. They were, you know, like our tour manager lost her husband to suicide as an Air Force veteran. Like but I wanted to show that it doesn't matter if it's what's innate. It's what's in you. Do you see the problem, and are you willing to step into the arena and say, okay, I'll give it my best shot. And that's, people are drawn to that, Will. And you know this. I mean, people are drawn. You're going to be afraid. I'm terrified every time I take something on. But one of the things my acting coach, Carl, taught me was the definition of vulnerability is not knowing what's going to happen next and taking action anyway. And I think that's what people are hungry for today.
I would love to see, you know, I don't even know, you know, veteran post-military career, you know, platoons. I mean, organizations where they're going out into communities like Ben's doing in Memphis, but with a real driven purpose for both sides of the equation, accomplishing a goal and giving those individuals, an ongoing purpose with their built skills. I agree with you 100%. This is something that serves both the veteran community and America, and I would love to see that be something that flowers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's happening. I think here's the danger that we're at right now. And this is where leaders like you who have these great platforms, I think can make a difference is I think that we have to communicate to our veteran population and to our military families that the way we turned the page on the Afghan war, the Iraq war was not the end game. A lot of our men and women are kind of checking out right now because they say, well, that was my adult life and it was for nothing. And that's tough, man. I mean, that is not good. And I think what we need to focus on right now, particularly as we look at this Israeli-Palestinian thing that could go high order any day, is that what our veterans did for 20 years was magnificent, honestly. And they have so much more to offer. They have so much more to offer here at home. And we need them. We need this leadership at home. With the book Pineapple Express, the last words in the book are something to the effect of, when we looked around and our allies were abandoned, we saw that nobody else was coming. That was our Pineapple Express. What's yours? Because that's what the question that needs to be asked, I think.
And that's my takeaway, Scott, of getting to know you, of working with you. And when we say what the skills are, right? It's action. It's just doing. When I was, on a day-to-day level involved with Lahaina, Task Force Lahaina in particular, not the other things I've done, but even the other things I did outside of Task Force Lahaina, it's just doing. It's just action. Yeah. It's the difference between those who do and those that don't is simply the doing. And I do think that's a skill that veterans have developed. Do something, act.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is like watching you operate with that and Amy and the others that were involved. And I saw your piece that you did on it. And it was really well done. And I saw your podcast where you clarified a lot of the myths and things. One of the other things that I would just add to that relentless execution that you talked about is the ability to connect people around a wicked problem, right? And this
that's
is something.
Man. That's you.
Well, but you know what? A lot of people have that skill. They know how to connect people, and it's almost instinctive. It's they see the problem and they're able to grasp the magnitude of the problem, but rather than try to fix it themselves, they're like, you know what? You absolutely must meet this person. I'm going to connect you to them immediately, and you can't sleep until they're connected. That is a lot of veterans have that skill. A lot of civilians have that skill. We need those catalysts, those connectors who can build communities around problems. I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about here is, yes, there are a range of complex problems that we face, but rather than waiting for institutional leaders to come and solve them, let's build communities of interest, communities of practice around these problems, start taking them apart and swarming on them, and model what it looks like so that the institutional leaders are so ashamed they have to come in and do something. And that's exactly what happened in the early 1900s. I think that's a lot of what happened in Hawaii with your work and the team's work. To some degree, Afghanistan it's not that we don't need institutional leaders, we do. But rather than wait on ones who are frankly more focused on dividing us than mobilizing us, let's connect ourselves, which we have a lot more autonomy than we think, and then make it so compelling that they have no choice but to get in there and do the right thing.
I love it, man. I do. People said to me before, "Will, you ever going to run for office?" I'm not interested in politics.
Me either.
And it's not just because I don't want to campaign. It's like, what can I actually do in there? I don't know, man. This is just way more motivating for me, to say you don't need to be a politician to effectuate positive change, and to just do.
You don't even need a title. I mean,
right.
Honestly, again, I keep going back to what you did with the aircraft, right? And I know there were a lot of people involved in that and a lot of people behind the scenes, but do you know what they all had in common? No one had a friggin' title. No one had an institutional title that mandated they do this or they do that. In fact, many of them, including the nonprofits that got the stuff on that plane, they live everyday lives, and they step up in a crisis and they make things happen, but they don't have a title. And I think that's the other thing to me with veterans around Veterans Day and our military families that's so exciting, is that you don't need a title to achieve a strategic impact. It's just simply not true. And there are so many examples of it that if we just open our eyes to them, they lead us down a path where we can just do more and more of that. And I think that's the best news for this nation right now.
And you got a nation full of problems, and you've got a nation full of people seeking a purpose, who are looking for purpose. And you can speak to the veteran side of that. I think I can speak pretty well to the civilian side of that.
Absolutely.
People are starving for purpose. Here are problems. Here's a starvation of purpose. This is the future right here.
It is, man. It is. And the biology of it is, humans are meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures. We don't take action unless we can assign meaning to it. And right now, if you look at the disengagement of the average American, it's like 85%. They're starving for purpose. That's a leadership problem. That's not a citizen problem. That's a leadership problem. When you have 85% of your population disengaged, it means they lack purpose. And a leader's job is to ignite purpose in the people they serve. And when you do, they respond magnificently to it. At least Americans do, I think. And I still believe that. I have to believe that. Because I have a lot of friends that aren't alive right now that believe that, and they died for that. And so I still very much believe that's alive in all of us, but we have to, it's going to be terrifying. It's going to be scary, and that's okay, right? That's what I've learned, is that that's all right when that happens, but we've got to be willing to step into the breach and lead when people are scared, and then they'll find as you said, the purpose and meaning in themselves, and with shaking hands and wobbly knees, they'll step in. But that's what it's going to take, I think.
Well, listen, man, I can hear the emotion in your voice when you talk about what not just you sacrificed in friendship, and what others sacrificed in their life for the belief in those values, that belief in this community. And it's I can hear your emotion, and it's appreciated, because for a lot of people like me that did not serve, it's as close as I will get to understanding that sacrifice. But what I can speak to firsthand is, to some extent, the man and the purpose that you filled after your military career, and what we're talking about here today. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that part of your life, Scott, and I hope it's something that can serve as inspiration, not just for me, which it has. That's how you and I got started, by the way. I just texted you one day and said, hey, man, I've been thinking about you, and you inspired me on this. And then before you know it, you've got me on a group chat doing all kinds of shit I'm unqualified for. But
right on,
but
man.
I hope everybody listening as well, because there's no difference between Scott or me or you listening when it comes to just doing and finding that purpose.
Yeah, it's just so true, man.
All right, buddy. I appreciate you. Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you, man. And it is a day of celebration. They're a national treasure. And don't forget, November is the Military Family Month as well. And they are so worthy of our love and praise as well.
All right. Scott Mann, thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
Awesome, bud. Thanks.
All right, man. Go get them.
Okay.
Hey, I'll be at the Fox Nation Patriot Awards. Are you going to be there?
Yeah, awesome. You'll be there. Great.
Yeah, I'll come.
Are you getting an award?
No.
Are you going to be on Fox and Friends this weekend? You're supposed to be.
Yeah, I think I am. I think I'm on with you.
Okay, good. Just making sure they got it done.
Thanks for making that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll see you next week. All right, bye.
Take care. See you later.